Yeah, as I said, I would like to make visible cultural change on these topics, on these concepts of national identity and national history in Russian children's book. And here, the first question is, what makes cultural change? What is cultural change? And I would like to define cultural change on the basis of culture and evolutionary system theory, as an adaptation process, first of all. As an adaptation process because I assume that society continually adapts to new requirements, conditions, and opportunities, and that cultural change is something like a reaction to these requirements, conditions, and opportunities. So the move or the driving force that makes cultural change, I think, lies in the societies and in the requirement, the conditions these societies live under. So I think that a certain form of social-cultural organization is passed on from one generation to the next generation. And each generation adapts these social-cultural organization form they got from their parents and the generations before them. They continually adapt them to given circumstances, as I said. And so what we find is that there come into existence lines of traditions that exist on all levels, and that are hard to avoid. Once we are on a certain track of development, I think, that route is formative for generation after generation. Change is only possible within the boundaries of this developmental trajectory, and it is possible only in the future. So corrections in retrospect are impossible. So how did I try to make visible? As I said, I tried to compare the current Russian discourse on national identity and national history to the Soviet and post-Soviet discourses on national identity. I assume that the current national image and the narrative of history represent an endpoint or the endpoint of a continuous development. They have emerged historically preceding national images of self and history, and at the same time are a product of adaptation to current requirements, conditions, and opportunities, as I said. So the comparison of the current image of self and history to the Soviet and the post-Soviet images show continuities and discontinuities in the development of the Russian discourse on national identity, and thus reveal cultural change. This is my basic assumption. So in a short form here, you see my research material. I analyzed 4 current children's books on history, and a long time ago in my doctoral thesis, I already analyzed in an equal way 15 Soviet textbooks of the 1980s and 10 post-Soviet textbooks, so of the 1990s, and these so I had a very comfortable situation that I could compare the current discourse to the Soviet and post-Soviet discourses. Children's books on history are unlikely to contain a critical historiography. However, they rather focus on the presentation of a coherent image of national history and identity. I think that the primary function of these children's books on history is to shape the worldview and the national identity of young readers. And what is more, and this is also why I chose these children's books and these textbooks on history, that I think that they have a very simple and prototypical form. However, I'm aware of the fact that for children's books on history, the text basis is not is relatively small and it is not comprehensive. Anyway, I think that we can observe already some basic structures and yeah, but I think that, and I would not claim because of this basis that that the statements I draw from that are universally valid. The study is based on a linguistic discourse analysis, and here you have the single categories I used. These are clear only linguistic forms that we or that I checked or that I tried to find in the children's books. I cannot define all of them. The result was that we were able to reconstruct the concepts you see below here, to reconstruct the concepts of Russia, Soviet Union, Russian people, and Russian national history. Yeah, and here you have already the results. So let's start with the first concept, and you already see the comparison in the current concept and in the discourse of the 1980s and 1990s. You can read that. I think it's really only the basis of the semantic profile of Russia presented in current and in former discourses. So what makes Russia Russia? What do the children learn about Russia? What is it? What is the semantic profile of this concept? And when we compare the two concepts to each other, we see that they are quite similar, and that they combine all the, or that the current concept combines all the positive qualities of the Russian Empire and also of the Soviet Union in the former discourses. All three concepts, so Russian Empire, Soviet Union, and Russia, they take on similar functions in their respective discourses as they specify what the homeland and the fatherland is. The same counts for the Soviet Union. Here you have again the current concept, and here you have the discourse of the 1980s, because the post-Soviet discourse of 1990s, in this discourse, the Soviet Union was seen very negatively, and therefore the Soviet Union was rejected. But today, this concept of Soviet Union, and you can see that here, is seen as an integral part of Russian history. So the positive semantic concepts that characterize the Soviet Union in the Soviet discourse of the 1980s are present again in the current concept, although they are a bit tempered today. And the next concept is the Russian people. Again, when you compare the two concepts to each other, you see that they are quite similar to each other. Here we find a structural constant that you find here on the bottom of the slide. So we find a discursive division of society into top and bottom. Into top, the rich, the powerful rulers on the one hand, and the bottom, the poor, the poor population on the other hand. I assume, and we find it in the current concept as well as in the discourses of the 1980s and 1990s. And therefore, I think that this is a hierarchical structural constant of the Russian worldview, which has its basis in a correspondent social structure that has shaped it for centuries, so that it is a constant that works until today, and that roots back quite far back into the past. And then one more concept, and this is the last one, the current image of the Great Patriotic War. I don't know whether all of you know what is meant by the Great Patriotic War. It is that part of the Second Worldview or that time of the Second Worldview, that phase of the Second Worldview, in which the Russian army and Russia took part in the Second Worldview. War. Yeah, and again we find that this Great Patriotic War is very similar in current and in current textbooks as and in discourses of the 1980s and 1990s. What is important here is the second structural constant, the demarcation between we, the Russian, the Soviet people, the good ones, versus them, the others, the enemy, the bad guys. That is what you also find in the current concept. The boundary between the positive connotation of Russian and the hostile non-Russian Western is a constant in the Russian collective memory, with its historical roots reaching well into the past. To sum it up, all in all, it turns out that the meanings behind the central constructs of the Russian self-image, that they have hardly changed. The self-image is that of a heroic, strong, proud, and invincible and unified nation in the most beautiful and largest country in the world. The current national image of history is directly linked to that of the Soviet and post-Soviet period. Russian history is a linear and harmonious one, almost inevitable in its course. And the message conveyed in current books on history is clear. Every child can be proud to have been born in this country, in this nation. Once again, to my assumption at the beginning, and here I would like to call it already the burden of tradition. As I said at the beginning already, the current image is the endpoint on a continuous development. And I hope that this became clear during the analysis and showing the results of this analysis. It developed on the basis of historically preceding images of self and history. And in so far, we can say that it is the burden of cultural tradition that limits the continuation of discourses on certain narrow paths. Similar, and I compare it always to a riverbed. When you see a riverbed that channels the river's course, cultural tradition promotes a nearly identical reproduction of a nation's self-image and its image of history. It counteracts any modification. Yeah, and now I can stop. I can have some more. I can deliver, or I would like to show you some possible explanations. Why is it so? So in the history, in the scholarly literature, in the historical scholarly literature, we find the division of three traditions of remembrance. So first of all, it is the Soviet tradition of remembrance, the democratic tradition of remembrance, and a national patriotic and Russian Orthodox tradition of remembrance. I can really, in a short manner, go through each of it. So the Soviet traditions of remembrance, what does that mean? It is most likely that the current image of self and history is in line with the image stemming from the collective memory of a large majority of the Russian population. When you imagine that parents and grandparents read stories in contemporary children's books to their offspring, they read also what they have heard in a similar form in their childhood. Socialization during Soviet or post-Soviet times also means socialization in the Soviet thinking tradition, which thus underlies the assessment of what is in today's children's books. Anyway, we also have a democratic tradition of remembrance because during the revolution and during the times of perestroika and glasnost, there was a possibility of a different telling of history. And this opened the way or paved the way for also for this democratic tradition of remembrance, in which democratic principles count, such as respect for human rights, freedom, equality, and dignity of the individual. What is important also is that this democratic tradition of remembrance takes on the perspective of the victims of war and violence. Anyway, this discourse gets relatively little attention in Russian society. The sacrificial discourse is difficult to reconcile with the popular heroic and victorious myth of connected to World War the Second. Anyway, we find today, maybe we can talk about that later on, a young maybe a young subculture that is or that tries to become active in this sense of a democratic tradition of remembrance. However, in the textbook that I analyzed, this tradition is the weakest one. And then we have the national, patriotic, and Russian Orthodox traditions of remembrance. And here you find a definition. So the primary goals of this tradition of thought that is promoted and supported by the Russian government and the Russian Orthodox Church, the primary goal is the promotion of a unified Russian nation, unity of the Russian homeland, and the preservation of given power structures. Individual human rights, parliamentary democracy, and the separation of powers are rejected. We have a collective-based community and a traditionalist Orthodox way of life are preferred over a so-called democratic one. National consciousness and the awareness of Russia's external and internal enemies should be strengthened. Overall, here I have it. We can see from the analysis that there is a prevalence of the Soviet and the national patriotic thinking traditions in the concepts of Russia, Russian people, and Russian history, in the division of a top and a bottom worldview. So this line between the social classes, and also the we. So the border between the we, the Russian, the Soviet people, the good ones, versus them, the enemies and the West. The glorification of the great patriotic war as a center of identity in not only, I think, in the school books, but also I think in large parts of the society, and the rehabilitation, that is something we observe, and we observe also in these books of Stalin as a great leader. One reason for the discursive presence of the Soviet and national patriotic thinking tradition is linked to being a national imperial power, that this makes more sense also to the rulers in the Kremlin and the democratic memory tradition. The consolidation of national patriotic thinking is part of the state policy under President Putin, which is also supported by the Russian Orthodox Church. In 2013, on the initiative of the government, a unified textbook concept was adopted, which defines how Russian history should be told. Again and again, President Putin has emphasized the need for a clear historical narrative, rationalizing that Russia needs it. An unambiguous narrative of history is characterized by fundamental conventionality and simplicity in the style of a grandmother story, which embodies a recognizability of the central axis in Russian history. This is exactly what we have observed. And an interpretation of the past from the point of view of the common sense. It is precisely this beautiful world that centers on Russia, the Russian nation, and its Tsar, this myth of the distinctiveness of the Russian nation and its past that we have found in clear and simple form in the children's books. Thank you very much.